In just 10 months, we've reached this devastating figure, every one a life. Tonight, the first person in the UK to die after contracting coronavirus, a woman in her 70s in the Royal Berkshire Hospital. In just 10 months, we've reached this devastating figure, every one a life. Good evening. The Prime Minister said today that it is hard to compute the sorrow as the number of recorded UK COVID deaths reached 100,162. Most of us never imagined this mountain of loss and grief back in March last year. If we had, would we or should we have done things differently? But first, here's our policy editor, Lewis Goodall, with the reckoning so far.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry to have to tell you that today the number of deaths recorded from COVID in the UK has surpassed 100,000.
It's while we're in this maelstrom that we have to maximise our efforts to overcome this deadly virus. In a moment, we'll discuss where we go from here. Boris Johnson said of the government, "We truly did everything we could." Many will come to their own judgment on that. When the pandemic is over, there'll be multiple inquiries and conferences and academic papers.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry to have to tell you that today the number of deaths recorded from COVID in the UK has surpassed 100,000.
Sadly have died. 6,159 have, I'm very sorry to say, died.
The daily reminder of how many have lost theirs.
15,464 have now died.
It has climbed higher and higher.
29,427 have very sadly died.
And 5 times as high as those in charge said it would be if this had all gone well.
If we can get this down to numbers 20,000 and below, that's a good outcome in terms of...
For so many, it's felt like time stopped in March 2020, like our lives were put on hold. But for more than 100,000 of our fellow citizens, our mums, dads, grandparents, uncles, aunts and siblings, their fate was far worse. $100,162 people have died within 28 days of a COVID test. That's roughly 1 in 660 British people. That's the capacity of Wembley Stadium, and then some more. It's roughly 128 Airbuses at full capacity, 114 Eurostar trains, the population of Carlisle or Exeter or Derry, more than all the casualties of every war the United Kingdom has fought since 1945. 14 times more. And remember, this is likely a conservative estimate. Excess death figures are best to fully capture the effects of the pandemic, and they have been increasing again. Since 2020, they're running at 110,100 higher, 15% higher than the norm. And though it is a little difficult to compare, the UK is at the very top of the table in terms of international deaths, with 1,400 COVID deaths per million. Behind every single one of these, someone who meant something to someone else.
I'd say it was quite traumatic to see someone so healthy and vivacious go from living a full life to being gone in the space of 2 or 3 weeks. And I would say that a very big part of who I am was because of my dad. And I've never felt so lost before.
Unlike the last great pandemic of 1918, this has been a plague primarily on our old, not young. Its victims, those enjoying their later years, their years of rest, to enjoy their families, and they them. Because 78% of all deaths have been those aged 80 or over. The biggest single group of deaths have been those aged 90 or over. But this isn't the whole story, because you're also more likely to be an ethnic minority if you died from this disease, more likely to be poor, and more likely to have to go out and work for your living, unable to sit at home working from your laptop. This list of 100,000 people is dominated by the old and all too often the working class. People who work in factories, more likely to die than those who work in offices. People who are in caring professions, 3 times more likely to die than those who are in the professional classes. Indeed, it is all too credible that if you lost your life from this disease and you are young, you are trying to prevent someone else from losing theirs. This January is about to surpass April as the deadliest month, with nearly 24,000 deaths and 5 days still to go. Indeed, this winter has been even deadlier than the spring. And whatever the month, it has been care homes, which have been one of the most tragic theatres of this virological war. Over the sweep of the year, that figure didn't stop climbing. Indeed, as of this week, we now know that nearly 23,000 people have died in care homes from COVID-19 in England and Wales alone. That's about 1 in 14 of the entire care home population. A minister once famously said that a protective ring had been placed around our care homes. The figures tell a different story. One of the sadder things about today is that it isn't even an ending. The drumbeat will get longer and louder still. The Prime Minister said the government had done all it could. The thing that must haunt us is whether that's right, or whether different choices at different times might have meant that the daily rhythm had been all the quieter, and the pain of those of us left behind all the lesser.
Lewis Goodall, we asked the government to discuss this, but they declined. We're joined by Joe Goodman, the co-founder of the campaign group COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice UK, Tobias Elwood, Conservative MP and Chairman of the Defence Select Committee, and Professor Callum Semple, Professor of Outbreak Medicine at the University of Liverpool and a member of SAGE, though he is appearing tonight in a personal capacity. Good evening to all of you. If I could begin with you, Joe Goodman, your father
Just had.
Thank you all very much indeed for taking part tonight. Well, later we'll be joined by the writers Jackie Kay and John Lanchester to talk about how the pandemic has changed us and how we move forward. First, nothing is untouched by the coronavirus, and everyone has felt the impact of it in the smallest of ways and the most profound. The pandemic has perforce altered NHS priorities. In England, almost 4.5 million people are now on the waiting list for routine treatment, including knee and hip operations. More than 192,000 people have waited for more than a year. Cancer, heart attacks, strokes, their treatment has all been affected. Over the past year, excess deaths, the code and clinical term for those who would not have died had it not been for the pandemic, have been 15% above the 5-year average in England and Wales and 11% higher in Scotland. The bereaved have often been denied the chance to see or touch their loved ones before they passed away, nor have they been able to gather and mourn properly. And we can only start to guess the impact on mental health amongst children and adults as the number of referrals increases. Money concerns and unemployment also take their toll. The latest jobless figures are 5%. That's 1.72 million people. How many of the almost 10 million people on furlough will add to that number? And how do you quantify the loss of learning for both school children and students, or the anxiety of isolation and loneliness? So how do we find our way back to the world that was? We're joined now by John Sutherland, former Chief Superintendent for the Metropolitan Police, Professor Neil Mortensen, President of the Royal College of Surgeons in England, and Larissa Kennedy, President of the National Union of Students. Good evening to you all. If I can bring you in first, Professor Mortensen. Thank you very much indeed. Well, when so many people are living with so much uncertainty and insecurity, how has it changed us, and from where do we derive hope? Indeed, just a very quick look at the front pages, and they're all strikingly similar there. We have the figure. Deeply sorry, says on the Daily Express. 100,000 deaths, says the Times, and we will remember them all.
Her heart light, her face almost smiling. And what I didn't know or couldn't say then was that she hadn't really gone? The dead don't go till you do, loved ones. The dead are still here, holding our hands.
Well, that's just about all tonight, but we leave you with Jackie Kay. She's at home in Glasgow with her mother, as you've seen, and this is her poem, Darling. Good night.
Darling, you might forget the exact sound of her voice, or how her face looked when sleeping, of her quiet weeping, curled into the shape of a half moon, trees, and the sun was out, and all seemed good in the world. I held her hand and sang a song from when I was a girl, healed off, her heart light, her face almost smiling. And what I didn't know or couldn't say then was that she hadn't really gone. The dead don't go till you do, loved ones. The dead are still here, holding our hands.
Jackie Kay, though you were talking about the idea of a day of mourning, but I wonder if there's going to have to be, it's not like a kind of national effort, a kind of collective recovery, but we are going to have conversations about how we do things differently.
I think so. I think we're going to have lots of different conversations. I mean, my next door neighbour, where here I am in Glasgow, his mother just died 2 nights ago, and today she had to pick a coffin, online, and 6 people coming. It's very brutal. It's been a brutal experience for people, and that experience is really, really difficult to make sense of and to even find a way to talk about. Who can you talk to? We're talking over the fence. I can't even kind of give her a hug. It's very, very difficult for people. It kind of comes closer and closer. And I was thinking, like John, my dad died the year before last, and I was able to have an extraordinary funeral for him, and Oren Moore, and that all felt really important and helped me with my grief. I don't know how I would manage at the moment, organising a funeral for 6 people and not being able to see my loved one and not be able to say goodbye. I think it's brutal and it's hard on people, and we're going to have to open up the conversations about death. People used to kind of cross the street to avoid talking about death, but I think we're all as a society going to have to get an awful lot better at talking about grief and death and loss, and to understand that grief keeps a different clock, and that you go on a journey with grief, and that journey can actually last a very long time, but that you aren't alone in it, and that there is hope, and that there is light, and that the best that you can think is that your loved one felt loved. Yes. and that they knew that they were loved. And so you have to just keep telling yourself, I think, different things to console yourself, but it's hard.
Thank you both very much indeed. Joe Goodman, your father very sadly died of COVID in April. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, my dad, Stuart, was 72. He had a number of underlying health conditions which made him particularly vulnerable to COVID-19, to the extent that my family were really concerned looking at the risk factors because they looked like a checklist of his health conditions. Despite this, he was one of the many thousands who contracted COVID in the week before the first lockdown. We think most likely at a hospital appointment, because no protective measures like PPE and distancing had been put in place at that point, despite the vulnerability of the people who were there. Because of how vulnerable he was and his health conditions, he unfortunately deteriorated really rapidly, and it was incredibly difficult watching someone you love go from being full of life to gasping for breath and fearing for their lives in a matter of days. He was one of the 20,000 first deaths that were considered to have been a good outcome if that was where we ended up. And obviously for all of us who were among that number, it was anything but a good outcome. But it really is hard to believe that we've actually found ourselves here with 100,000 deaths. And when you know the impact of that on a family and how it can tear a family apart.
Well, I wonder, just to ask you about that, and Boris Johnson said today that he was deeply sorry.
Sorry, it's not. I think we're now reaping the reward for having pushed into jungle areas, having exposed us to animals which carry these viruses. There's a lot of environmental issues going on, again with global warming. if the temperatures rise, then we see changes in insects and mosquitoes carrying viruses into different parts of the world. That's causing new diseases in Southern Europe and in the Americas. Now that we're pushing into jungle areas, we're getting exposed to viruses such as SARS, MERS, and occasionally Ebola virus too. So I suspect in the next 20 years, we'll see something similar to this, albeit not on the scale that we've just had.
Thank you all very much indeed for taking Berkshire Hospital. In just 10 months, we've reached this devastating figure, everyone a life. Tonight, the first person in the UK to die after contracting coronavirus, a woman in her 70s in the Royal Berkshire Hospital. In just 10 months, we've reached this devastating figure, everyone a life.